and welcome to our Week 4 lecture in Criminology. Today's lecture is going to be based on the textbook Criminolgy, 3rd edition by Frank Smaliger. We're working on Chapter 4, which addresses biosocial and other perspectives, contemporary perspectives of crime. So we're going to start with our chapter objectives. So, again, Biosocial and Other Contemporary Perspectives, Chapter 4, Criminology, 3rd edition by Frank Smaliger. We are in the summer session at Pierce College. And our chapter objectives, first of all, we're going to describe the purpose of the Human Genome Project and explain its significance for modern biological theories of crime. To that end, to help you to understand the concept, as this is not a biology class, and I don't know how far removed many of you are from the study of biology, I will be posting 2 videos that I collected off of YouTube that give you a brief explanation of the Human Genome Project and its general significance to healthcare, criminality, and all kinds of things in our society. We're going to identify the role of genetics and heritability in contemporary explanations of crime. As you may recall, in last week's lecture, there was some discussion of so-called criminal families, the study of the Jukes, the study of the Calicacs, and the handing down of what was then called feeble-mindedness, or a mental handicap, if you will. And the one strain of the Calicac family that came from a so-called feeble-minded barmaid tend to pass these traits down, while the other side of Calicac, because he had relations with 2 different women, the other side didn't have those same things, and that was his relation and his marriage with a supposedly upstanding Quaker woman. So we're going to get more into that, and what is the role of genetics today? Do we actually have criminal families? Is it simply an influence? Going to look at brain dysfunction as it relates to criminality. That would be in our 2nd video. This is going to be broken down into 3 video portions, as I did last week, to make it simpler for you to digest. We're going to describe how body chemistry theories, including those involving diet, blood sugar levels, environmental contaminants, and hormones, so all those things that we expose our bodies to, and how they affect our behavior. Not just things like alcohol and drugs, but things like inhaling fumes from the chemical plant that's next door to your house, or the effect of smoking on a fetus if the mother smokes a lot during pregnancy, or fetal alcohol syndrome. We'll look at that as well. We're going to discuss biosocial theories and the role of the gender ratio problem in contemporary criminology. Simple thing about the gender ratio problem is, as most of us do know, significantly higher rate of crime among males as opposed to females. Why is that? We're going to then, of course, look at the policy implications of modern biological theories of crime. As we've discussed in the past 3 weeks, we're studying these things, trying to find out what crime is all about, what are the causes of crime, and what benefit is it to go to all that trouble to study that crime if we don't translate that into some type of policy, which, remember the term translational criminology that we discussed in week 1. We need to have some use for this stuff. If we're going to nail it down, this might be the cause of crime, or this factor, this factor, this factor, and this factor together cause a lot of crime, then maybe we need to start coming up with policies that address those factors, whether they be social policies, whether they be psychiatric evaluations of inmates as soon as they get in the door at the prison system, or even do we go back and do brain scans of kids toddlers to see if they have potential? Do we check DNA if we find out there's a gene? We identify that there's some gene that every criminal has. What do we do in society? We're going to identify critiques of biological and biosocial approaches to explaining crime. Those are the chapter objectives, and of course you can read them in the front of the chapter. For those of you that have chapter 2 of this textbook, I did post a copy of this chapter, chapter 4. If you have edition 2, I've posted a copy of this chapter in the doc sharing, because this chapter is a new chapter to edition 3, which was supposed to be our textbook for this course. So that's the topic we're covering this week. And as a reminder, you do not have to take the quiz this week that's posted in week 4. I would wait until week 5, because this was a chapter that was not originally included when the quizzes were created, and therefore the quiz that's posted in week 4 is actually for the chapter we're going to cover next week, and it's going to be the same thing. All the quizzes are bumped up, and then there is a final quiz in a chapter that we likely won't be covering, but it is covered in your book if you want to try that chapter out. I believe that's probably chapter 8 in your book, or 7. But as you follow through, you'll figure that out, and I'll let you know when we get to that point. All right, so our next thing we need to cover in this first lecture is the Human Genome Project, its significance for modern biological theories of crime. As I did last night in the on-campus lecture, I will refer you to the videos. It's actually during the on-campus part, I showed those videos at this point in time. I'm going to post them adjacent to this video so that you can either stop right here and pull that one up and watch it, or wait till you finish this first lecture and then watch the human genome video before you move on to video 2 in this lecture series. So what is the Human Genome Project? All right, it's an international research program that's designed to construct detailed maps of the human genome. And basic idea, our body is made up of genes. We have DNA, and all these things are the building blocks. And they relate to various traits, whether it's your hair color, did I gray too early? Is that a genetic issue? Or was it stress? Who knows? But if it's a genetic issue, my original hair color, my original eye color have to do with genes. So the question here, obviously in criminology, is, are those same genes that affect the fact that my eyes are hazel and my hair was brown, do they affect your behavior? That's the idea. So knowledge developed by this Human Genome Project is likely to have momentous implications for individuals in society, because we're finding out all kinds of things. We're finding out if there's a gene that leads to a certain disease later in life. And that's been going on for years. They identified some genes early on, but they're still working on the entire mapping of everything, and mapping different people. And to be able to identify certain things, again, momentous. If we can identify that someone has a certain gene, can we replace that gene? Right before they're born or after they're born? Is there a way to do that kind of thing? Can we make changes? And there's a lot of ethical issues that go along with that as well, because if you're having a baby and you don't like the traits that you find out in the genome or in their gene map, and we have the ability to change those, would you do that? If you knew your kid was going to be a blonde, would you want to make them a redhead? That's the simple part of it. But if you knew that there was a gene that more than likely led to somebody being a serial killer, would you change that? But what if that gene didn't always? What if there were perfectly normal people that aren't serial killers that have the same gene? Very difficult ethical decisions. Crime control policy, like I said, Human Genome Project, expected to support the development of public policy options related to crime prevention and the treatment of offenders. Again, if we find that there are specific genes that contribute to certain behavior traits or certain other things that may predispose someone to committing crimes, is there a treatment that we can provide for them? Is there policy options? Can we somehow prevent crime by treating these people ahead of time? All right, the next subject kind of ties right into the Genome Project, is genetics and heritability in contemporary explanations of crime. There's the idea that there are traits that are handed down. Some of them might be behavior traits. You can see that when they did twin studies, and we talked about twin studies last week, that some people act very similar to their twin who they did not even grow up with. They were raised in totally separate environments, but they had behavioral similarities. And that more likely has something to do with their genetics and have inherited traits. So some of the studies, Ropers and Bruner did a study, and they said that, at least their belief was, because men had only one X chromosome, that they were especially vulnerable to any defective gene. Now, this is something to keep in mind later on in this chapter when you're talking about the ratio between male offenders and female offenders. Is this the reason? Is it the fact that if you have a defect in the X chromosome, a defective gene in a male's X chromosomes, is that more likely to lead them to crime? Where with females, they have two X chromosomes. So if they have a defect in one, the other one will compensate for it. At least that's their belief, that you have a backup, so to speak, in females that you don't have in males. Neurophysiology is research that examines the relationship between the neurotransmitters and behavior. So how the signals are transmitted throughout the body, the different chemicals that are used to transmit those messages, how do they relate to people's behavior? Some cases, genetic predispositions plus the interaction with the surrounding social and physical environments combine to produce delinquency. Again, that's a study that someone did. They identified that maybe there were some genetic issues amongst the group that they were studying. And they noticed that they had a group that was raised in a certain environment and another group with a similar genetic makeup that was raised in a different environment, and noticed that the interaction of the one environment may lead to delinquency while the other environment did not. Again, based upon studies. So the idea here is it's not just as in the study of the Jukes and the Calicacs, it's not just that there is genetics involved. It's not just that a trait is inherited, but it's the combination of factors that come from that genetic makeup and the interaction with society, whether it's how you're raised in the family, the neighborhood that you live in, and all those types of factors. And we're going to see later on in the next video, we're going to talk about body chemistry, and we're also going to talk about brain dysfunction. If you combine these various factors together, it could create a mix that might lead to crime. And we actually have a slide later on that has all these different little bubbles to show you the potential mix. Heritability is the proportion of variation in a trait within a group of people that can be attributed to variations in their genes rather than to their environment. So obviously it's going to be a complex scientific study that none of us are probably going to do, at least in the near future, unless some of you are going to go on and study more science and be more involved in criminology later on in your lives. But when they do these studies, we have to somehow account for what you call confounding factors, so that you can determine that, okay, this is solely related to their genetic makeup. And a good example is the twin studies. Twins give you that really, really nice, easy way of looking at it. If you can locate twins that are raised in totally different environments, and you find that they have similar behavior traits, it's very possible that you can suggest that, okay, these behavior traits have to do with genes rather than environment, because their environment, these two people who have similar genetic makeup, was totally different. Genes may simply influence the way in which people respond to their surroundings. So that's another thing, is genes may not be what creates the behavior, but it influences how one responds to what it is that surrounds them in their life. I think I went the wrong way. Yeah. science. All right, epigenetics is a study of chemical reactions that occur within a genome that switch parts of the genome on or off strategic times and locations. So scientists are suggesting that chemical reactions within the body can actually change how certain things go on in your genes, which then may change your behavior. And some things that could affect and cause these chemical reactions: stress, diet, behavior, toxins in the environment, or things that you may take into the body, other factors that activate chemical switches that regulate gene expression. And you think about some common examples. You know, those of you that are military or former military who know folks that had PTSD, ask their family members, you know, what was Joey like before he went to war, before he spent that time in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, and what's he like when he came back? I just watched the movie American Sniper for the second time, which was about Chris Kyle, who was a Navy SEAL sniper. And I think the movie did a really good job of showing the change from the kind of guy that Chris Kyle was emotionally to the kind of guy he was after spending so much time in a combat situation. And his situation may have been, a sniper situation like his might have been unique in that, you know, he had direct eyes on his target. And because of the nature of the battle in those places, he had to shoot down people that look like civilians, maybe even children, because they were ready to harm American soldiers. And, you know, that's something that stays with you. You know, anybody who's spent any time in law enforcement or the military or emergency medical service or the fire service probably has nightmares, that things that they remember. And when you go into combat, you have a whole lot of them. Or if you're in a big city police department, or a police department that has a whole lot of activity, or if you're working in that big city police department and you're in the neighborhood that has all the bad stuff happening, you know, you're exposed. Whether you're in Chicago that had over 900 homicides last year, or you're here in Philadelphia, where the homicide rate as of yesterday is 20% higher than it was last year at this time. And a lot of those homicides are happening in specific areas of the city, and you have sometimes the same officers responding to those calls and seeing these terrible things. And, you know, I can only imagine from my own experience with death, being both a firefighter and emergency medical professional and a police officer, and seeing lots of really bad situations, that officers in the city or military people in combat see multiple times more than I ever saw in my career. And I know how some of those things bother me. Imagine how they bother them. But the science here suggests that that stress of those types of things actually create changes, physical changes within the body. And they say your diet does, and your behavior activities, toxins, all these things can change how you act. And that's epigenetics. It is limited, however. You know, how heritability explains crime is kind of limited by the environments. Because although we could say that, you know, people with this particular gene are involved in crime, but maybe it's only people in a specific environment as well. So it's hard to say specifically that, you know, this A or Z or T or whatever is the one that is the crime gene. Because again, the interaction is an important factor. Genes are both the cause and consequence of our actions, and they do not so much determine human action as enable it. So you think about that. A gene may make it more likely that we do something, or something that happens to us may cause that gene to occur, but it doesn't necessarily specifically determine our behavior, but help it to occur. That's the enabling factor. You know, when you help something to occur, you're enabling it. So the gene may be an enabler as opposed to a real causer. All right, this is going to be the end of this particular video segment, I would ask that at this point, after you finish this section, go back into the course and find the two videos that I've posted on the Human Genome Project and watch them before moving on, because you're going to want to tie the information about what the Human Genome Project actually is to the information about causes of crime and how it might relate to crime that we just discussed. So do that right now. Before moving on to video 2 in this series, go and watch the 2 on the Human Genome Project. And I'll see you in a bit. Thank you very much.